So we think we live in a democracy, but we really don't. We live in what I call a shamocracy. There really is a ruling force in the United States that really is calling the shots here. And I also say that we live in a Kim Jong Un society. Now, Kim Jong Un society, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that this ruling force has control of the media, and they can propagandize you into believing what they want you to believe. And one of the things that they want you to believe is that they are a superior type of intellect. And I don't find that to be true. I don't find that to be true based upon the results that we've gotten in my lifetime and various foreign excursions. I think these people are very good at enriching themselves. They're very good at giving themselves awards, but I don't think they do a whole lot of good for the American people. And you can evidence that by a lot of the homelessness that we see in the United States, the number of drug-addicted people, the fact that many people have to work 2-3 jobs in order to get by. And that just wasn't the case back in the 1970s when, the regular worker, someone who didn't go to college, had a better chance at getting ahead. And I think if you look at just how minorities fared back in the day, back in, say, the 60s and 70s, much better than today, where our ruling elite have, I think, preyed on the black community in the inner city. And they just have, in my mind, intentionally destroyed their communities in order to provide prisoners for their prison industrial complex. So I don't think these guys who are in the ruling class are smart at all. I think they're devious. And I think it's important to just go over some of the myths that go into the so-called supremacy of the ruling class. Many of these people graduate from Ivy League institutions, the traditional Ivy League institutions, and then those schools that over the past century have gained the status of Ivy League, even though they're technically not part of the Ivy League. You only have 8 schools in the Ivy League. But you have other schools that, like Stanford, UC Berkeley, that have sort of taken on that status. And there's others as well. Those aren't by no means the only two. And so one of the ways that they fool you is by telling you that these people who go to these Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale were the valedictorians of their class or the salutatorians. And so you may be thinking, wow, they were first or second in their class. They must be smarter than the rest of us. So it's important to break down that fallacy of being number 1 or number 2 in your class as being some qualification to rule. Now, first of all, the entire idea that we would arrive at this system where we would say that someone who was number 1 in their class or number 2 in their class at 17 years of age is entitled to rule for the rest of their life that's just ridiculous. But let's look at the valedictorian and the salutatorian. So this implies that everyone cared about finishing number 1 or number 2 in their class. And let's face it, there's a lot of smart people who it's not a big deal for them. That's the farthest thing on their minds. Now, many of these people who are finishing 1 and 2 in their class often have some sort of mentor, someone who's guiding them along. Well, what if you're a smart guy and nobody pays attention to you? Nobody is a mentor to you. Suppose that your parents weren't academic types, so they were just blue-collar types. They don't really know anything about how this crazy system works. So that's going to put you at a disadvantage. Now, this fallacy it also implies that everyone had the capability of being number one or number two in their class. And you have a lot of smart people who are emotionally compromised, and they're emotionally compromised because of a lousy home situation, or things just aren't working well at home. And these people, they're not trying to finish number one or number two in their class. They're trying to survive. They're trying to get through adolescence. And so those people, they're not going to be finishing one or two in their class. It's the farthest thing from their line. Now, another factor in this fallacy is that, let's say you have students who do care and they aren't emotionally compromised. What if they can't afford to go? What if they can't go? Well, let's take the case of Richard Nixon. He couldn't go to an Ivy League school if he wanted to. He had to stay back in California and help take care of the family store because his father was sick. So what about those people? There's a lot of people who, for one reason or another, just can't go to these institutions. And then, of course, we mentioned in another video how many parents browbeat the teachers when they're in high school to have their child retested so that they get a higher score so they can go to an Ivy League school. So you have a lot of factors there that contribute to why the Ivy League school isn't getting the best and the brightest, and why the best and the brightest come from anywhere. And then there's the fact that the Ivy League institutions are vastly outnumbered by the non-Ivy League institutions. And so the number of, even if you just said that 10% of the, or 5% of the people outside the Ivy League were really super smart people, that would still be greater than the number of Ivy League people, assuming that 90% of them were smarter than anyone in the United States. Do you see what I'm saying there? Just by numbers alone, the non-Ivy League institutions outnumber the Ivy League institutions as far as intellect, power of intellect. And yet, we have graduates from these Ivy League institutions that are predominantly in power in the United States. So why is that? It is that way because when you go to Harvard or you go to Yale or Princeton, there are really two schools there. There's the liberal arts school, where you learn about economics, physics, math, biology, maybe a foreign language. And then there's the other school. It's called the School of Power, where you're indoctrinated into the halls of power. Now, I know this is the way it is because I had a friend whose daughter went to Harvard, and he would tell me how they were flying his daughter to Europe, to here, to there, how his daughter met this famous person and that famous person. And that's not by accident. They're doing that to make these graduates feel comfortable with being in charge. When you go to medical school, they start calling you doctor in your third year. They're not doing that because they think you have the capability of being a doctor. They're doing that so that you can feel comfortable with people calling you a doctor. And it's the same thing when you go to these Ivy League institutions. They want you to feel comfortable with people in power. So that's why when you go to Harvard, you're regularly going to have guest lectures by people who you hear about in the news. And so this impacts, the graduate who goes to Harvard University. He feels very comfortable with people who are in power, and he feels, sort of entitled too. Hey, I'm entitled to rule. Why am I meeting Alan Dershowitz? Why am I meeting Tom Hanks? Why am I meeting Henry Kissinger? Well, Why is that? I mean, other people aren't meeting these people. Why me? So the real answer is because that's the way they set it up. They set it up that way because they're indoctrinating you. They're inculcating you into a system of power. But that's not what the human mind thinks. The human mind, very subconsciously in the background, concludes it's because I'm better than other people. It's because I'm smarter than other people. I was the valedictorian in my class. I must be better than other people. And so that's how these people become entitled. And that's how come they all become filthy, stinking rich, because they work the system to favor themselves. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're told that they're the best and the brightest. And so in order to cement that home, they subconsciously, I don't think they really understand what they're doing. They work the system so that they do become more wealthy, to validate themselves. So what ends up coming about, or what you end up having, is a Kim Jong Un Society, where they are not only are they indoctrinated, but you are indoctrinated as well. I mean, you're just the regular guy, but you're not immune from the propaganda and the BS in the United States. You've been told the valedictorians are the smartest. The Harvard takes the valedictorians. Harvard is the smartest. You're regularly regaled with them on national television. They're always introduced as Harvard graduate. So you're kind of cowed into a state of submission, of bowing down to these people. Well, they must be the best and the brightest, but you can just look at the results around you, and you can see that they're not the best and the brightest. So they have this sense of entitlement about themselves. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is that you are impacted daily by this propaganda, and you don't even know it. For example, have you ever heard of the Hasty Pudding Club? It's an acting troupe or an acting club out of Harvard. Now, I think I was first introduced or indoctrinated into the cult of the Hasty Pudding Club, I think when I was going to school in Mexico. And I was reading this newspaper out of Laredo. I think it was the Laredo Times. I can't remember. But and I'm reading just this little blurb in there, and they're talking about the Hasty Pudding Club. And I knew it was an acting troupe out of Harvard. So I'm thinking to myself at the time, why is this national news? Why would the goings on of an acting troupe in Harvard be something that would be fit for national consumption? Why would this be distributed over the wire to every newspaper in the world? I mean, if it got to the newspaper in Laredo, it got everywhere. So as the years went by, I realized, well, it's just propaganda. You see, why are they talking about the Hasty Pudding Club? Because it's Harvard. They're not talking about an acting troupe from your school. They're talking about Harvard. It's a message. It's a hidden message that impacts you. These people are important. You're not. Now, Harvard graduates, this friend of mine who sent his daughter to Harvard, I noticed that when she and her husband, also a Harvard graduate, got married, their wedding announcement was in the New York Times. Now, of course, I had long known, even before that the people who attend these Ivy League institutions often get their wedding announcements and their baby announcements announced in the New York Times. But I had to ask myself, well, why would that be? Again, it's just another form of indoctrination. My friend's daughter, she only lived in New York briefly to go to Columbia. They weren't from New York. Her husband wasn't from New York. So why the New York Times? Why are they putting their wedding announcement in there? Well, the New York Times is, of course, it's not just a national newspaper, it's an international newspaper. And so when they put a Harvard graduate's wedding announcement in the New York Times, what they're saying to you and to them and to everybody is that these people are important, you're not. These are the people who will lead. They're the people worthy to be discussed and to be talked about, and you are not. So you're propagandized that way. So that's why I say we live in this Kim Jong Un society. You know, Kim Jong Un in North Korea, he has his picture everywhere, his image everywhere, and a lot of BS is spoken about Kim Jong Un. And I gather that many Americans are probably dumbfounded by that, and they think, well, how silly is that, right? You know, and then, you know, if you listen to some of these North Koreans who escape, one particular girl who escaped, she recounts this story where she says, you know, when I was a little girl, we were told that the leader, Kim Jong Un, or his father, could hear our thoughts. Now that's absurd. But if you've been told that your whole life, you believe it. And similarly, in the United States, you've been fed a lot of BS about Harvard. Another way that you're being impacted is how every single genius in a Hollywood movie either comes from Harvard or MIT. And as I explained in another video, why would that be? Albert Einstein didn't go to Harvard or Yale. He didn't even go to a top school in Europe. He went to a third-tier university, Federal Polytechnic, in Switzerland. His professor, one of his professors, labeled him a lazy dog. He wasn't a terrible student, but he wasn't the top student in the class. Okay, Steve Jobs, he didn't go to Harvard. He didn't go to Yale. He went to Reed College. Okay, a fine school, but not an Ivy League school. Was he a genius? I think he was. How about Thomas Edison? How could you say that guy wasn't a genius? Guess what? Not only did he not go to Harvard or Yale, he didn't go to a school at all. He was homeschooled by his mother. So you see that geniuses can come from anywhere. And yet you're told in the movies, you're impacted, geniuses come from Harvard. Mitch McDeere in The Fern, where does he come from? Harvard. It's very subtle, and it's only a tiny little piece of programming, but that's how you get conned into voting and deferring to these people. And that's why we have so many of these Harvard graduates or Ivy League graduates in charge. And it's like a club. It's like a cult. Not only do we believe it or defer to it, but they believe it as well. And they start inbreeding and they start selecting their own. Now, there are many law firms up in the Northeast establishment. They call them white shoe firms. And that means that they only want people who graduate from Harvard and Yale. So there's a lot of inbreeding and indoctrination going on. And they start believing the BS themselves, that they're the best, they're the smartest. And that's bad for the country, because then they tend to dismiss anybody who doesn't come from their little cultural Ivy League circle. And I think that's what's contributed to the demise of this nation. And the only way to fix that is for you to start understanding that genius can come from anywhere. You know, you don't have to go to an Ivy League school. Smart is smart, intelligent is intelligent, and your experience is just as valid as their experience. Okay, so I think we'll just wrap it up here, and maybe we'll talk about this in another future video, but I hope that helps you understand, you know, the propaganda that goes on in the United States, and why you don't really get a real choice in this country. It's propaganda. All right, thank you.